Good morning, Fabulous Fives. Welcome to another day of Maths with Mr. Travis. I hope that you're well and you had a good rest and you're ready to tackle some more fractions. Right, okay, so we are going to need some pencil and paper today to do some workings while we're in the lesson. So if you haven't got, please go and get now. A reminder that you can email me at any time, grade5@worksheetcloud.com. You can find the email address on this page. And after the lesson, you'll be able to find your homework in the link above the video. While people are still fetching their paper, I spoke yesterday about the importance of knowing your times tables. I think most of my times tables were about 12 seconds when I said them nice and clearly and slowly. What I'd like to ask you guys to do is to practice them. So make sure, first of all, that you can get it right, and then time yourself, see how long it takes to say your timetable, set yourself a goal, and practice a little bit more and see the next day if you can make your goal any quicker. All right, I hope everyone's managed to get their pencil and paper so far. Let's jump across to our lesson and start. Right, so there's the email address in case you didn't hear it when I said it first, or if I said it too quickly. So today in fraction 3, we're going to look at what we finished off at the end of last lesson, looking at equivalent fractions. So hopefully by the end of this lesson, you'll be a master of equivalent fractions, at least up until 12ths. All right, to recap from last lesson. In last lesson, we looked at ordering fractions when the numerators are the same, ordering fractions when the denominators are the same, and we started looking at equivalent fractions. So before I go to the lesson goals, let's have a quick look at yesterday's homework. Right, okay, having a look on my iPad. So you needed to organize these from smallest to biggest. So I think the first thing to make absolutely sure of is that it said from smallest to biggest. So we need to find the smallest fraction and go to the biggest fraction. All right, rolling up my sleeves. Okay, so if we're looking at these ones, all the denominators are the same. So we just look at the numerators, and if we're going from smallest to biggest, then our numerators are going to go from smallest to biggest. So first up we have 1 over 10. Our next smallest number would be 3 over 10. Next would be 5 over 10. 6 over 10. 7 over 10, and finally 9 over 10. Deliberately for this one, I didn't have all of the numbers, so you can see that there is no 2 over 10, 4 over 10, or 8 over 10. It doesn't matter, we're still going from smallest to biggest. So when the denominators are the same and you're going from smallest to biggest, then your numerators will go from smallest to biggest. All right, having a look at the second set. These ones we needed to organize from biggest to smallest, and this time our numerators are the same and our denominators are different. So we're going from biggest to smallest. So just a reminder that the number at the bottom, the denominator, says how many pieces our whole is broken up into. So we want the least pieces. In other words, the pieces are the biggest. So our biggest would be 2 over 4. The next biggest would be 2 over 5, because we've got 5 pieces that the whole is broken up into. Then we will go to 2 over 7, 2 over 8, 2 over 9, and finally 2 over 10. So we're going from the smallest to the biggest. The biggest to the smallest, as it says in the question. All right, and having a look at our last one, we needed to circle, that's the instruction, the biggest fraction. So which of those is the biggest? All right, so hopefully, and we'll spend some time practicing this yesterday. I did say that this may be tough, so we are going to go through this tomorrow, but having a look at this, if we, maybe let me make it no, I think I can write that small. If we have a look at this, we can make this one, we can times the bottom by 2, and we get 4 over 8. And if we're comparing 2 over 8 versus 4 over 8, then we can see that the biggest one is this one. So this is the one that you would circle. All right, because those two are equal, we've just changed the way it looks. Okay, having a look at our next one, we've got 1 over 2, 2 over 4. If I look at this one, I can see that I'm going to times both of those by 2, and that will become 2 over 4. And then if I'm comparing 2 over 4 to 3 over 4, I can see that 3 over 4 is bigger. That's the one I'll circle. Right, in our next one, I can also see that I can times this one by 2, which will give me 4 over 6. And if I'm looking at 4 over 6 versus 3 over 6, 4 over 6 is the biggest. So then that one is the biggest because those two are equal. And finally, the last one, I can notice that this one, we times by 2 to get 6 over 10. And if I'm comparing 6 over 10 versus 2 over 10, I can see that 6 over 10 is bigger. And because that's equal, this is the one I circle. So in each of these, I gave you the same one. So in each one, we were timesing by 2 to get the matching denominators. Right, but it won't always be 2. Quite often, it'll be something different. Okay, let's jump back to our lesson. Okay, so today's lesson goals: to be comfortable with converting fractions to equivalent fractions. That's what we started yesterday. And to be able to convert all of a set to the same denominator so that you are able to order them. So in our lesson where we ordered, from smallest to biggest, you need to be able to do that, even if they're not all the same to start with. So first change them, and then we put them in the right order. Okay. Right, so eventually we will get to cases like this where we need to find equivalent fractions for both before we compare them, but for now we're just looking at one. But I did think I would quickly have a look at this one, just for any bright sparks out there who want to have a look at what it might look like. So for example, I had a half and I had 2/3, and I wanted to find out which one was bigger. All right, so I could draw them. Over here I've drawn my half. Over here, okay, I'll come back to that one. And over here I've drawn 2/3, and I can quite clearly see that 2/3 is bigger than a half. But that won't work if we've got really big denominators. Like imagine we had 100 and we had to draw something that was broken up into 100 pieces. That'd be very difficult and time consuming. So we rather don't do that. So let's just look at the numbers. So I couldn't find anything I would be able to do to a 2 to make it to a 3, or anything I could do to a 3 to make it into a 2. But I did notice that both 2's and 3's could fit into 6. And so what I did was I found an equivalent fraction which had a 6 as a denominator, an equivalent fraction that had a 6 as a denominator. What I did to the bottom, I did to the top, and I found both of them as 6. So this is this one here drawn, and this is this one here drawn. So same fraction, that's just done with different numbers. That's what equivalent fractions is, but you can see it shows the same amount of the whole thing. Right, and on this side, you can see that I drew it again. So we had 2/3, which I drew, and then I made that into 6. And you can see it's showing the same amount of a fraction, just done differently. But once we've converted both of them to 6ths, we can see that they're very clearly that this one is the bigger of the two, which is what our pictures showed. So in grade 5, you are expected to be able to work with fractions up until 12ths. So before we start, let's have a look at some equivalents. I do think that we should always aim to do more than just the minimum requirements. So in the process of working with fractions, we'll go beyond 12ths, but that's as much as you're expected to be able to cope with in grade 5. So let's look now at how we say the fractions. Right, so when we name fractions, the second word, how we name them, we name according to the denominator. So the first 4 are a little bit different, but once we get to the 5ths, you'll see that it makes a lot of sense. Okay, so first up, the number in front that we write as a word, you can see comes from the numerator. So in the first few, I've just got 1s, but later on I've got different numbers. So 1, and when we've got 2 pieces, we talk about halves or half. So 1/2, 1/3, So 3 relates to third. So if you came third, you would be the third. So if you came third, you would be number 3 in a race. So the 3 becomes third, 1/3. Quarter for 4. Might be familiar that it sounds a little bit like quad, which we dealt with in one of our lessons last week. So 4 is quarter. If it's a 5 at the bottom, it's fifths. If it's a 6 at the bottom, it's sixths. And you can see that these words are relating very strongly to these names over here. Okay, I've changed over here. So this, the 2 comes from the numerator. So 2/7, 3/8. I particularly like this word if you're ever playing hangman. It's definitely one I think that lots of people will struggle to get with all those consonants next to each other. E-I-G-H-T-H-S, eighths. Oopsie. Right, over here we've got ninths, we've got tenths, we've got 11ths, and we have 12ths. Another one of those slightly difficult words to say. So we have 8/12ths. That's how we say the fractions. Right, so we're going to do 2 worked examples together on our whiteboard. These are the ones. If you'd like to write them down on your scrap piece of paper and do them together, then yeah, let's do that. Okay, I'm going to just switch over to my whiteboard while you write those down. Right, there we go. Okay, so we need to make the denominators the same. So I'm looking to the bottom and I'm saying, what can I'm looking at the one on the left first. What can I do to a 3 or to a 6 to make it like the other one? And I notice that I can do something to a 3 to make it into a 6. The things we're allowed to do, we're only allowed to use times and divide. All right, so whoops, let me make it a little bit lower on the screen. We can only use times and divide for equivalent fractions. Right, for now I'm going to stick to just using times. All right, so having a look at the first one, I can notice that to make a 3 into a 6, I can times it by something. I'm sure you figured out what. If I times a 3 by 2, it will be a 6. So what you've got to remember is that what you do to the bottom, you do to the top. So what you do to the bottom, you do to the top. What you do to the top, you do to the bottom. Right, so if I times my 3 by 2, I also need to times my 2 by 2, which means my new numerator is a 4, because 2 times 2 is 4. And my new denominator is 3 times 2, which is 6. Right, so now I'm looking at 4 over 6. I've just changed it. I found an equivalent fraction. And now I'm not changing. I'm just bringing it down so I can look at it next to each other. I can very clearly see that 4 over 6 is bigger than 3 over 6. And if you're not convinced, I'm going to draw it for you quickly. So I'm going to draw, let me do it as a circle. We can pretend that's a nice looking circle. So I was looking at thirds to start off with, a little bit like the Mercedes-Benz sign or the peace sign. Right, and we had 2/3. It's from our numerator. To make it into sixths, all I'm going to do is break those pieces in half. And now if we count them, you can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 6, and that's where our 4/6 comes from. So you can see that 2 over 3 is the same as 4 over 6. All I did was change it, and the reason I changed it was so that I could look to see which of these is the bigger, with the denominators being the same. All right. let's have a look at the one on the right. We've got 5/10 and 2/5. Now this time I notice that I don't need to change the one on the left, I need to change the one on the right. And again, I can times that by 2 to make it into 10, which means I must do the same to the top. So from the top, I get 2 times 2, which is 4. That's my new numerator. And on the bottom, 5 times 2 is 10. Now I'm able to compare 5/10 with 4/10, and we can see it. Does anyone want to see the drawings? I think I can manage that. So let's first of all start off with a 2/5. See if I can draw fifths. There we go. That's roughly fifths. Let me color in. I had 2. 1, 2. Now I want to make them into tenths, so I'm going to cut each in half. So you can see 2, I'm making each piece into 2. And now if we count them, let's use purple for counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's where my 4 comes from. And out of 10, which is where my denominator comes from. All right, here we go. So there's 2 that we've done together. I'm now going to set you the task of doing some on your own. We're going to try on you're going to try on your own. I'm going to give you about a minute for each of them, maybe a little bit less. And then I'm going to go through them. And if you've got stuck, you'll be able to figure them out. All right, so in fact, let's go across to the next page. Here are the ones I'd like you to try. Right, so it's 17 minutes into the lesson. At 20 minutes into the lesson, I'll work through these with you. So remember, the most important thing is that you want to get the denominators to be the same. If it helps you to draw them, you're most welcome to draw them. Should be busy with the second one at least. But there is no rush. Accuracy is more important than speed in maths. Right, I'm going to switch across to the whiteboard in the meantime. If you're finished, that's great. If you're not, not a problem. Right, so I've just rewritten them on my whiteboard. Apologies that I look down when I'm working on the whiteboard. It's because I'm writing on my page down here. Right. Okay, let's have a look at the first one. I hope that you noticed that we can do something to a 2 to make it into a 4. It's the same thing we've actually been doing to most of them. And that is to times it by 2. And sing it with me. What you do to the bottom, you do to the top. So we have to times the top by 2 as well. Right, which means if we change to yellow, that our new numerator, the number on top, is 2. And our new denominator is 4. Right, and if we then compare it to 3 over 4, which hasn't changed, we can see that it's very easy now to put them in order, either from smallest to biggest or biggest to smallest. Okay. Number 2, I hope you got that number 1 right. If not, this is a learning process. So notice where you went wrong and work from there. If I look at number 2, I can see that, can't do anything to the 9, but I notice I can do something to the 3. And it's different from what we've done before. So I'm going to count in 3s till I get to 9. So 3, 6, 9. So I'm going to have to times the 3 by 3 to get to 9. And I'm glad it's stuck in your head. You're going to go to sleep thinking about that song, that rhyme. I don't know what you would call that. But you're going to go home, you're going to go to sleep tonight thinking of that. Okay, so our new numerator is 6, because it was 2 times 3. We got 6, and our new denominator, 3 times 3, is 9. Right, and if we're comparing 6 over 9 to 4 over 9, we can easily see which one is bigger and which one is smaller. Right, on to number 3. I noticed that this time I can pick the one on this side and times it by 2. And you guessed it. Right, and in fact, later on, not this lesson, but in our coming lessons, we'll look at when you first change the one on top and then you have to do the same to the bottom. Right, so 3 times 2 is 6. 2 times 4, 4 times 2 is 8. Right, so that's the equivalent fraction. 7 over 8 stays the same, and now we can very easily see which one is bigger and which one is smaller. Okay, so now that we know how to do that, now I'm going to give you these kind of problems where we need to see if we can organize a set of 4 into order from smallest to biggest, or biggest to smallest. In this case, we're going to do it smallest to biggest. When it's given to you like that. So you'll notice that, unlike before, we don't have a situation where all the denominators are the same or all the numerators are the same. So we first need to make the denominators the same before we can really compare how big they are. And the same story over there. So let's pop across. Well, I'll give you a chance to start while I write it on my whiteboard. And as soon as I'm done, we'll jump across. And if you've managed to finish them, fantastic. If not, you can work with me. Right, switching back over to my whiteboard. Let's move the screen to get rid of all the other things from there. Right, so we'll start off with the first one. Okay, so I'm sure that you will have, at this point in the game, noticed that we could make all of the denominators into 6. So first up, I'm just going to make sure all of them are the same. I times that by 2. If I times that by 2, I can then get them all to being over 6. So 1 times, let's change color, 1 times 2 is 2. 3 times 2 is 6. This one can stay unchanged. 2 times 2 is 4. 3 times 2 is 6. This one can stay the same. All right, and now that I can see them all together, I can organize them from smallest to biggest. So this one is the smallest, 1 over 6. That one's the next smallest, 2 over 6. 4 over 6. and 5 over 6. Right. Hope that you managed to do that. This is a learning thing. All right, let's move on to the next one. Right. Okay, so in this case, we're going to change these two so we can get them all to be 8, or 8 as a denominator. So this one, if we go times those together, we get 6. Times those together, we get 8. Looking at the end one, that times that gives me 2. That times that gives me 8. This one stays the same. This one stays the same. And now that we've put them all into the same denominator, we can organize them from smallest to biggest or biggest to smallest. For this case, let's do biggest to smallest, just mixing it up a bit. So I see that 6 is the biggest, so 6 over 8 would be the biggest fraction. Then we have this one, 4 over 8. Then we have this one, 2 over 8. And then we have this one, 1 over 8. Right, so that's what we've done, using equivalent fractions to figure out what all of them are so that we can put them into order. And that's what you're going to be doing in your homework today. Right, that almost brings us to the end of the lesson. In fact, it does bring us to the end of the lesson. I hope all of that makes sense. Just remember, if it doesn't, or if there's anything that you want to go over again, or anything that's bothering you, just email me, grade5@worksheetcloud.com, and hopefully I'll be able to help you either in an email or I'll answer the question in our next session. I hope that I see you again tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of the day. Have a lovely afternoon. And this is Mr. Travis signing off. Goodbye.